So what's going on, guys? DIY Dan here again, and this is another mechanical video. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to dismount and mount tires using tire irons. So I've been in the mechanical industry with construction for over 20 plus years, and I've been doing tires that entire time. The other thing to keep in mind is I'm 160 pounds, so you don't have to be a big bulky guy in order to dismount and mount these tires easily. It's all about the technique that you use in order to dismount and mount these tires with the tire irons. And you can use this method of dismounting and mounting tires for any size tire and wheel, regardless of the size. So I'm going to be showing you this on some old tires with some rusty wheels. So this is not a perfect situation, which is exactly what you should be watching in order to learn how to do this. Because not every mount and dismount that you're probably ever going to do is going to be a nice shiny wheel with a brand new tire. I'm going to be going over everything from breaking the bead to dismounting the tire, mounting the tire, and then seating the bead so you can air the tire back up. Not only am I going to be showing you how to do this when it does what it's supposed to do and everything goes smoothly, but I'm going to show you some other methods when it does not go as it's supposed to and it's being a pain in the ass. So let's get to it. So when breaking the beads, I used to use a tire hammer all the time. However, in recent years, I've gone to a slide hammer because it's just easier on the body. Your first hit with the slide hammer should be right under the lip of the rim and angle it more towards the rim than towards the tire because it actually wedges between the rim and the tire to break that seal. After a couple hits, if you're starting to hit the wheel with the end of the slide hammer, then you can angle it more towards the tire. And if they don't pop, then you need to just work your way in small increments around that wheel until it does break the bead. The concept is going to be the same with the tire hammer. Your first couple hits should be right under that lip and angle it more towards the wheel because that will crack the seal between the tire and the wheel. You're going to work that around one way or the other. Once you have a gap between the wheel and the rim, then you can angle it more towards the tire. So the most critical thing to dismounting and mounting a tire is to do it from the correct side of the wheel. Right here, you can see how much I'm struggling to get this tire put on this wheel, and that is because I tried to mount it from the wrong side of the wheel. Once I realized it and flipped it around the correct way, the tire and wheel went right on. So every wheel has a recessed area on the wheel. You always dismount or mount the tire from the spot where that recessed area is closest to the outside of the wheel. So you'll notice I flipped the wheel over and I'm mounting this from the correct side, and look at how easily it went on to the rim. So here is that recessed area that we're talking about. You'll notice how much farther this area is away from the edge of the wheel than this side is. So you would always dismount and mount from this side of the wheel, and that goes for any wheel. It'll always have a recess, and you always have to look for that. And you will be able to see that recess on the outside of the wheel as well. A quick history to tell you why this is so critical. One of my guys that worked for me a long time ago actually managed to mount the one side of a brand new tire on the wheel the wrong way, and we could not get it the rest of the way on, and we could not get it back off, and we had to cut that brand new tire in order to get it off of that wheel. Now that was an extreme circumstance, the fact that we couldn't get it back off. It was an equipment tire with a very thick sidewall. And quite frankly, I don't even know how he managed to get that first side of the tire mounted on that tire in the first place. Another critical when dismounting a tire is to use a lot of tire lube and make sure you put it in after you break the bead so that tire lube gets down between the rim and the bead, not just sitting on top. So to get the first part of the tire off the wheel, there's varying opinions. Some people prefer to use this side of the tire iron. If you decide you like using this side of the tire iron, you're going to end up put this raised section of the iron against the lip of the wheel to help you leverage off the tire. I actually prefer using this side of the tire iron. However, if you are going to use this side, some of these tire irons come with a little tit that you might have to grind off to make it easier to remove the tires. You can also buy them without that tit, and then you don't have to worry about it. So right here is a good view of the side of the tire iron I'm using and the direction that I'm putting it into the tire. I like to put the tire irons about 6 inches apart from each other, basically big enough where I can put my foot between the tire irons. I set my foot in there and then kick on the back of the tire to put that part of the bead of the tire down in that recessed groove. As you kick the back of that tire, you're going to start leveraging on the tire irons You can usually do one at a time or both at the same time, whichever you prefer, to get that bead of that tire up above that wheel. The tire iron should hold that bead up, and you can remove one of the tire irons to re-grab another section of the bead to leverage it up and over the rim. There is a sweet spot to stick that tire iron in for the next bite, and it is usually halfway between where the bead is above the rim and where it is recessed into the wheel. You will continue working that bead around until it is pretty much completely up and off the wheel. I probably should have taken one more bite because it's not quite off the wheel completely, but with a little shimmying on the backside, pulling on the wheel, it broke loose. So if you're struggling to dismount a tire, most likely it's because your technique is just not there and you're not using leverage correctly. Notice the direction that the tire irons are going in the rim right here. Notice the kick to the back to push that back bead down in that recessed area. Then you twist the tire iron out. Don't try and just pull it out. Make sure you twist it out. Make sure when you're grabbing another bite, it's right at that sweet spot, and just keep working it around until it's completely broke free. Then you're going to go in from the back side of the tire and wheel with the tire iron in this position and hook the tip of that tire iron over the wheel and then leverage the tire off of that wheel. Now there is a sweet spot for this too. You're basically going to want to let the tire and wheel fall to the ground just before the wheel hits the ground. That's when you're going to want to be leveraging up on the tire. It might not come off the first time and you will get into a rhythm. Don't waste your energy trying to throw the tire to the ground. Let gravity do its job and just use your energy to try and leverage it back up when it's almost about to hit the ground. So the key things to make this part of this job easier is to go in at a drastic angle so you're not fighting the lip of the rim on the other side while you're trying to get it into position. You want to barely put the tip of that tire iron over the wheel so you have the maximum amount of leverage as you possibly can. In all actuality, I'm stuck in a little too far right here. And when you're leveraging the tire off, let gravity do most of the work going down. Just use your energy to try and leverage the tire up off the wheel. Now sometimes it's not always going to come off even if you're doing all these things correctly because it's either a rusted wheel or an older tire. So here is another way you can leverage these off if you can't get them the way I just showed you. You're going to flip that tire and wheel around and then lay it down on the ground with the rim in the up position. Then you're going to grab another tire iron and just leverage it between the tire and the wheel in small increments and pry it up. This is sometimes helpful if you do have a second person to help you hold the one tire iron while you leverage the other one. You can continue to work these around in small increments until it pops it out. If you can't get it to leverage off like that, you can also dismount it just like you would the actual tire off the wheel. Get the pry bar in. Now you're actually going to reverse the angle of the pry bar to make it easier to get it between the rim and the tire here. And then just leverage it off like you would dismounting the tire. When putting a new tire on a wheel, it's always a good idea to replace the valve stem. Remember, the most critical thing when you're mounting a tire back on a wheel is to make sure the wheel is in the right position. This one is upside down right now. You'll notice that even though the valve stem is up, this is actually the wrong side to mount this wheel on. Remember that tire lube is your friend. We're going to flip that wheel around so it is in the right position in order for us to mount this tire. And then we're going to set that tire on the wheel and use our knee to start the tire on the wheel. Now back in the day when my knees were younger, I used to knee that tire all the way on the wheel. These days it's a little easier on my body to go ahead and use a tire iron and leverage it the rest of the way on the rim. So take note on which side of the tire iron and the direction I'm using it right here. And remember that the smaller the bite you take, the easier and the less leverage and force you're gonna have to use to put it on. Now I have had tires where I could not leverage the first bead on the rim like this, either because it's just a stout sidewall or it's an older tire that's a little bit more on the stiff side. And if that's the case, you can take a tire hammer and hit the bead of the tire and work that tire onto the wheel by hitting it in small increments around the bead, and it will work its way onto that wheel. On bigger tires and wheels like 11R22.5s or 24.5s, I've actually stood on the tire as I smacked the bead with the tire hammer, because that extra weight of me standing on the tire would help work it on as well. So 9.5 times out of 10, tire lube is your friend. However, it can be detrimental as well. Right here, I was trying to leverage the first bead on the wheel and it just kept slipping off. So I had to take this back off, clean that tire lube off with some brake clean so it would actually have some holding power to hold it on the wheel while I was trying to leverage it on. Once you've got that first bead all the way on the wheel, you're going to take one of your tire irons and notice the direction I'm using this tire iron and grab small bites and work that bead around onto the wheel. Notice when I'm leveraging the tire over the wheel that I'm also kicking the bead down into that recessed area. Sometimes you cannot hold the bead of the tire with your foot, and the one bead will start popping up on you as you're trying to leverage the other bead on. If that's the case, you can stick a tire iron in that bead and hold it down with your foot while you work the other bead around with the tire iron. Or as we had just discussed with the first bead, is clean up with some brake clean the first little bit of area on that bead where you're trying to hold it so that it has some gripping ability, and just lube the rest of the tire where you're trying to work it around with the other tire iron. If you are struggling to get the tire leveraged over the wheel, the most likely cause of this is that the back bead is not down in the recessed area of the wheel. On a tire that's playing nice, it will just work its way right down into that recessed area. On older tires like these, that is why I am kicking the tire down into that recessed area as I leverage it over. Now, if you're struggling with the balance of trying to hold the tire iron in with your one foot while using the other tire iron to leverage the tire around onto the wheel, I have used a pair of vice grips to take the place of that one tire iron so I don't have to worry about standing in that exact place and holding that the whole time. If you do this, you barely want to clamp the lip of the wheel, and you do need to pay attention to make sure that those vice grips aren't damaging the bead of the tire as you work the other bead around. So one more time, the keys to making this part of the mounting a tire the easiest is to take small bites. The bigger bite you take, the more leverage and more force you're going to have to use to leverage that tire over the rim. And as you're leveraging that tire over the wheel, make sure the other part of the bead is going down into the recessed area of the wheel. If it's not, use your foot and kick that tire down into that recessed area as you're leveraging it. When you get to the end, sometimes you cannot get that hook part of the tire iron over the wheel because the bead's in the way. If that's the case, sometimes it helps to lay another tire iron across the wheel, and that gives you more leverage to get that hook up over the lip of the rim. As far as getting the beads to seat so you can air them up, one of the best tips I can give you is to go get one of these fast inflators. They come in the most common quick coupler styles for a 3/8 air hose, and you can see how much volume of air is going through that versus a regular tire chuck. And that is the whole concept of getting a bead to seat on a wheel, is you have to put more air in than what's leaking out in order to seat that bead. So all you have to do is take that valve core out, then thread that quick inflator valve onto the valve stem, and then go ahead and plug your air hose in. And more often than not, that thing's pushing so much air that usually those beads will seat on those rims without a problem. You can also use some tire snot to go around that bead if you're having a hard time getting it to seat, because once again, all we got to do is get more air going in than what's coming out in order to get that bead to seat. So I'm sure most of you guys have heard of the method of using starting fluid, right? Obviously, what we're doing there is creating an explosion, which is a huge amount of air in a very short time frame, so that there's more air going into the tire than what's coming out, and that's what seats the bead. Another option here is using a tire blaster. Once again, we're just using a high volume of air to push into that tire in order to get that bead to seat. So when I'm using a tire blaster, I tend to put the tire and wheel up on a bucket, and that way I know gravity is holding the bottom bead down against the wheel, so there's not going to be much leakage there. So the first 2 times I used the tire blaster, I used a regular tire chuck, and it came unseated because there wasn't enough volume of air going into the tire. The 3rd time I used the quick fill, and it went and seated right away. When using a tire blaster, I tend to push it all the way down into the tire and wheel. Then as I push that ball valve quickly, I pull it out of the wheel at the same time. So that's pretty much going to wrap it up, guys. Right here, I'm actually dismounting and mounting a 16-inch tire and wheel using the slide hammer and the tire irons to show you that can be done. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video and it gave you some good information. If so, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I'd really appreciate it. The whole concept of my channel is to give you guys the most information in the least amount of time as possible so I don't waste your time. And I hope to see you next time. Have a good one. Later.